Hey everybody, it's Mark again. In this video, I've been getting a few questions and I want to clarify the questions through a video. And the question is, what is InShake and what is the purpose behind InShake and what happens if you don't have InShake? This video is going to describe the difference between InShake and pivotware. So kick back, relax, grab something to eat, grab something to drink, grab a cigarette if you choose to do so, and let's learn things. And please give me a thumbs up, hit that notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and please leave me comments. I get in a discussion with people all the time about InShake. A clock has to have InShake in every one of the wheels or the clock will not run. InShake is back and forth movement of each gear or wheel from front plate to back plate. Even the birch and crutch assembly has to have InShake. Most of the time when you do bushings, when you put a bushing in, is when you typically will have problems with a clock not having InShake in each of the gear. And in a case like that, you might have to file the bushing. But here is the second wheel, back and forth, up and down, from front plate to rear plate movement is what InShake is. The escapement wheel, same way. Birch and crutch assembly, same way. The main wheel, same way. It's not side to side, it's up and down from front plate to rear plate. In a case like this, if, let's say, the second wheel didn't have InShake, it might be that this stem off this main plate here might have got bent toward the movement, and you could take a screwdriver and pry it out to get InShake. Unless you put bushings in, that is normally the only time that you don't have InShake. Your pivot hole, your pivots could have a burr on them, preventing InShake. So again, every wheel has to have InShake, to include the birch and crutch assembly, which is not a wheel. Every wheel, main wheel, second wheel, escapement wheel being the third wheel, has to have InShake, which is up and down from rear plate to front plate, up and down movement. If you have to force it up and down, you don't have InShake. It has to be free InShake. Now, if you have the power on the clock, for example, if this was a spring-driven clock and you wind it all up, you're not going to be able to do this with the main gear and the second gear. You might be able to do it with the escapement wheel, but you need to take your power off before you check for InShake. The same way with the weight-driven clock, you have to take the weight off to check the wheels for in shake. Up and down movement, not back and forth movement, but up and down from front plate to rear plate is what I'm doing. I'm moving the wheel from front plate to rear plate to check for in shake. And you might have to get a pair of tweezers to do such, to check for in shake. But again, every movement, every clock movement has to have in shake in each one of the wheels to include the birch and crutch assembly before it can work. As I was saying, all parts have to have in shake to include the birch and crutch assembly. Now on this clock, I purposely bent the brass arm that the birch fits in to show you that there is no in shake. If you look closely enough at the pallets, when I pull back and forth from front plate to back plate and so forth, it does not move. And therefore, when I put a weight on, the birch assembly is not going to move. If I was to add more pressure to it, it doesn't move. But if I was to take a screwdriver and pry that open to give it in shake, it will start to move. Just like that. Because now it has in shake. Now when you look at the pallets, when I move it back and forth, you could see the pallets move back and forth at the escapement wheel. Every clock part has to have in shake. That is to include a wooden gear movement. The way the clocks are designed, they have a beveled edge at the very end where the pivot goes, and that will allow it to have in shake. The clock has to have in shake in order for it to work. Every part. So when you, especially with cuckoo clock movements that you have taken apart and put back together, take a pair of tweezers if you can't get your fingers in and check each gear for an in shake. Here's the wooden gear out of a wooden plate, wooden gear movement. There is some taper on this wheel here. However, the pivots are long enough to provide that in shake back and forth from front plate to rear plate. And again, every clock wheel gear has to have in shake back and forth from front plate to rear plate to front plate movement. I hope I covered this enough. And again, it has nothing to do with pivot wear. Get this movement off. Pivot wear is where you or moving the gear back and forth to look for wear on the pivot from side to side, up and down. If it has too much, and you should be able to see the escapement wheel here, you can see the pivot wear. But because this is a one-day movement, it allows for pivot wear. If it was an 8-day movement, it's a judgment call. And I've showed you in other videos where I do a tilt test, where I take the clock all apart and let's say this is the plate of the clock. When I take the clock all apart and I put the pivot, each pivot into its pivot hole, if the wheel touches the plate, you have too much pivot wear. You need a smaller hole. Let's see if I can find a smaller hole on this thing. This is just a block of wood that I use from time to time. All the holes are too big for this gear, for this wheel. Are not deep enough. But anyway, you should get the gist of this video. Pivot wear versus end shake is two different things. Pivot wear is the hole itself if it's worn out. End shake is grabbing a hold of one of the wheels and moving it from front plate to rear plate to see if there's movement. And you have to have movement or the clock will not run. While editing my video, I decided that I wanted to add one more portion to this video, so I drilled a smaller hole in this block of wood. And as you can see, with the proper hole, the wheel will turn around in the plate. It doesn't touch, the wheel doesn't touch the wood. I might have drilled that a little bit too deep. I got so many holes in this thing, it's hard for me to see. But anyway, you can sit here and spin the wheel around because the hole is properly, and if the hole was too big, it's more like a top. It's going to hit the plates, therefore stopping your movement from functioning. And because of that, it's going to continue to make this hole bigger. The dirt and the grime, and because this thing is constantly, let's say this was the escapement wheel, because it's constantly turning, it's like a drill bit with the oil and the dirt and the grime. It's going to oblong the hole. It's going to make it bigger. So you're going to need a bushing later on down the road. And so, again, that's why I do a tilt test, and this is not a very good example of what I wanted to show you, but I think that you get what I'm trying to get across. And that's why I prefer you to leave comments. This is the movement for this gear. I bought this, I got it rather cheap. I paid like $25 total for it. But there's a broken tooth right here. So before I can use this, I'm going to have to create a tooth. But it's completely wooden except for the holes themselves. They have metal, brass, or metal bushings themselves in. And then, of course, the birch and crutch assembly, the pivots themselves are steel, because if they were wooden, over time they're going to break. And so I don't want to take this thing all the way apart to show you what I'm trying to get across. I think what I showed you already is suffice. Again, please leave me comments. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope it makes sense. People in my channel, people within my groups, they ask me questions, and if it's a repeat question, I try to make a YouTube video to answer that, because typing something out versus showing somebody in a video, to me, I'm a touchy-feely kind of person. I either want to touch it or I want to see it in order for me to understand it. Now, I might not have done as good as other people would have done. I've never considered myself an expert. I have over 400 clocks. I repair my clocks myself. Some people call me an expert. I help people out all the time. Sometimes it takes me a little while to figure something out. Some people call me an expert. I don't consider myself an expert because I never went to school. I never made parts on a lathe, etc., etc. There's a lot of things that I haven't done, and why I don't consider myself an expert. I do consider myself a fairly good teacher. And so the teaching is from my experience. And so, anyway, please leave me comments, and may God bless each and every one of you.